Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Molly, also known as Mojo when I'm on the trail. And today I'm going to be talking about the two tents that I brought with me on my Appalachian Trail through hike. I'm going to go into some details comparing the two, like the weight and the cost, the durability, some other things like that, and at the end give you a recommendation or what I would bring if I was doing this again. So the Trek recently released the results from their 2024 thru hiker survey regarding shelters on the Appalachian Trail. The Trek found that 65% of thru hikers are using either freestanding or semi-freestanding tents, while 30% of hikers are using trekking pole tents. They also found that the #1 brand of tent on the Appalachian Trail this year was Durston, and the second most common was Big Agnes. And Durston primarily makes trekking pole tents, while Big Agnes primarily makes either the freestanding or semi-freestanding tents. So I started off the trail with the Summit Alto TR2, which is a two-person semi-freestanding tent. And if you don't know, semi-freestanding means that there are tent poles, but you also need stakes in order to set it up correctly and have it stay standing. But this is just a way for tents to be a little bit lighter. About 1,900 miles into my thru hike, I switched to the Durston X-Mid Pro 2, which is a trekking pole tent. So it doesn't come with any tent poles. Typically, you have to use your trekking poles in order to make it stand up. Let's get into some of the specifics about the tent. First, gonna start with the size of the tent when they're packed and in their stuff sacks. So the Durston X-Mid Pro 2, when it's all packed up in its stuff sack, is roughly 11 by 5 inches, while the Summit is about 4.7 inches by 20.5 inches. Obviously tell that the X-Mid Pro is a lot shorter than the Summit, but it is a little bit fatter. So I actually really liked the shape of this tent. It made it really easy to put it in an outside pocket of my pack and just have it vertical on the side. I didn't have to find space for it in the main pocket. When I switched to the Durston, it wouldn't fit in the side pocket, so I had to rearrange some things and figure out how to make room for this in the main pocket of my pack. But so that was a little bit of an adjustment when I first switched over. But the next thing I want to talk about is like ease of setup. I'm going to set up both of these tents and we're going to see how long it takes me to set up each one and which one I can do faster. It is raining today, and at first I thought that was a bummer, but I actually think it's going to be okay, because one of the things I want to talk about is setting up a tent in the rain and which one is better or harder, or the pros and cons of that with each of these tents. So I guess it ended up being a good thing. I'm gonna see how long it takes me to set up. All right, let's set up the Durston. Let's go. It took me 2 minutes and 20 seconds to get the Durston X-Mid Pro tube setup. So it took me just a little over 4 minutes to get this tent set up. So just to recap that just a little bit, it took me just over 4 minutes to set up my Sea to Summit tent, and it took me about 2 minutes and 20 seconds to set up the Durston. So yeah, the Durston is much faster, but they're still, both are just still super easy to set up, like under 5 minutes. Like, you can't complain about that. Some downsides to a double wall tent like this one in terms of the rain are that you do for the most part have to set up the inner part of the tent first and then put the rain fly on, so there's more chance of the inside of your tent getting wet when compared to like the trekking pole tent that's only a single wall tent and it's all one piece. In addition to that, at least this tent that I have, the material absorbs water a lot more than the Dyneema. So when you take it down and you pack it up, it's going to weigh more because it just absorbs that water. And until it dries out, it's gonna be a little bit heavier. But let's take a look at the inside and see how wet it is. So I did my best, obviously, to get the rain fly on as quickly as possible, but there's still some moisture on the bottom of the tent, and it's just a little damp. But when I was on the trail, I would just take like my bandana and just kind of wipe it down before I set all my stuff up. So not that big of a deal, but it does get a little damp in here when you're setting up in the rain. So I want to quickly talk about like the durability of this tent. So I bought this tent in 2022 and took it on some backpacking trips around Oregon with my husband and our dog. So I had it before going on the Appalachian Trail, and then I hiked 1,900 miles with it. And for the most part, it's held up really well. There aren't like any visible holes like in the rain fly or anything like that. Like, the material has held up. I think there's like 1 or 2 maybe tiny holes in the mesh part of the tent that I saw last time I set it up. But again, like, for the most part, it held up really well. I don't remember where they are. The one thing that did happen was that some of the seamed ceiling tape has started to kind of peel off and has allowed some water to get in my tent. So when it is heavily raining out, I had some water falling on my face a few times on the Appalachian Trail. But I think that's something that I can fix. I've been trying to figure that out. I just haven't quite had the time to do it. But yeah, in terms of durability, you know, having the tent for like 2 years before I started the trail and hiking 1,900 miles with it, I think it held up remarkably well. And I typically use 6 stakes for this tent. 2 for the inside tent and then 4 for the rain fly. Like I said, this holds onto a lot of water. This is the rain fly. I only had this up for like, what, maybe 10, 15 minutes? And like, you can like squeeze it out. Yeah, just holds onto a lot of water. So that took me about half the time. It took me 2 minutes and 20 seconds to get the Durston X-Mid Pro tube set up. All right, so let's take a look at the inside of the tent and see if there's any water in here. All right, for the most part, the inside of the tent is completely dry except for where I was just sitting. All this water is literally just for me. The inside stayed pretty much completely dry when I was setting it up. So yeah, so that's a big bonus for single wall tents like this. It's all one piece, so it really helps to keep the inside of your tent dry. However, when you take it down, if there's any like moisture on the inside or like condensation even, because it's one piece, it's hard to keep the inside layer dry because of that. Whereas with the other tent, they're separate, and mine go in separate stuff sacks, so that would help a lot to keep the inner tent dry if the rain fly was wet. So kind of a toss up there. So as far as durability goes, I only had the Durston for about 300 miles of the Appalachian Trail, so it's hard to compare the durability between the two tents because I had one for so much longer and used it so much more. But for those 300 miles, it held up perfectly. There's absolutely no damage to it. I did reach out to Ziggy and ask him to comment on the durability because he took his on his entire thru hike, so he's gonna get me that in the next couple of days, and I will share with you what he says. Well, it's been a few days since I filmed the video with my tents, and in the meantime I have gotten sick, so please pardon my voice. But Ziggy got back to me with his thoughts on the durability of his Durston. Gonna go over what he said. So like I said earlier, Ziggy brought his Durston X-Mid Pro 2 on his thru hike, and he had it the entire time. He said that it held up extremely well. He had 0 leaks and 0 holes. He never got any holes in the floor of his tent. He did have the ground sheet as well, but he was never concerned with that ripping or anything. He did have one issue with the zipper on one side of his tent, but he thinks that he caused this issue by putting too much tension on the tent and then trying to zip it. It wouldn't fully unzip. It would always get stuck in one spot. I told him to reach out to Durston about this and see if they could fix it for him. I'm just not sure if he's done that yet. He also said he liked how quickly it dried and how easy it was to set up. Overall, he really liked the Durston, and he said he would also recommend it to anyone looking for a good Dyneema trekking pole tent. Right, before I take it down, I do want to talk about one of my favorite features of the Durston. So the way that you like hold the rainfly and the tent inner back is with magnets, and I think that's just a really genius way of doing it. My other tent has these little things you have to fuss with, and it takes a lot longer. But here, let me show you. So literally just a magnet. So easy, so simple, it's genius. So if the weather's nice, you can get away with just using 4 tent stakes with the Durston. Just now I used 5, so I could stake out the rainfly or the vestibule a little bit better. Another thing to take into consideration, at least for the Appalachian Trail, is the fact that at least up north, like in New Hampshire and in Maine, there are tent platforms. It is a little bit more difficult to set up a trekking pole tent on a tent platform compared to a freestanding or semi-freestanding tent. A tent platform is just like a wooden platform, so you can't put your stakes in, and stakes are essential for a trekking pole tent. So it's definitely possible, but it's a little bit more tricky. I have seen tent platforms that have like hooks on the sides of the platform, so you can attach your guy lines, and this helps to set up your tent. For me, it wasn't really an issue. A lot of times I'd actually just stay in the shelters. I was concerned about it before starting my trail and questioned it, but by the time you get out there and you hike all the way to New Hampshire, like, you're pretty much a pro at setting up your tent, and you can figure it out. Like, it's not a huge concern. One thing people question a lot about the Durston tents is just like the size of the footprint when it's set up, and that it's a bit larger than some other tents, and this is true. From my experience, it was never an issue. Even on the Appalachian Trail, when it's pretty crowded, there were obviously a lot of Durstons out there, as it was the #1 tent brand in 2024, and I don't think anyone with a Durston had issues finding a spot to set up their tent. Yeah, you'll pretty much always find a spot. If you make it to a shelter area and it's full, you might have to just hike a little bit further or find a stealth site, something like that. But you always make it work. You know, once you kind of get into the trail and people get more spread out, then it really becomes a non-issue. A really big factor in choosing a tent for a long backpacking trip like a thru hike is going to be the weight of the tent. My Summit Alto TR2 semi-freestanding tent comes in at 2 pounds 15.3 ounces. So that is a little bit on the heavier side as far as like ultralight backpacking tents. It's definitely not the lightest option out there, even for semi-freestanding tents. I think the Big Agnes is a little bit lighter at like 2 pounds 8 ounces, something like that. And then the Durston, just the tent itself is 19.9 ounces, and I have the ground sheet. So both of those combined, the weight is 25 pounces or pounces. The weight is 25 ounces or 1 pound 9 ounces. So that is a whole lot lighter than the Summit tent, and that's one of the big reasons that I decided to switch to the Durston while on my thru hike. It's because I really wanted to cut some weight and reduce the overall weight of my pack. So I have the X-Mid Pro 2, which means that the fabric is Dyneema, but Durston also makes an X-Mid with a material more comparable to my Summit. It's a little bit heavier than the X-Mid Pro. It's about 35.4 ounces or 2 pounds 8 ounces. All right, and probably one of the biggest factors for a lot of hikers is the cost of these tents. I'm going to start with my Summit tent. If you go and you buy this tent from REI or Summit right now, it's going to cost about $549. However, that is not what I paid for the tent. A lot of times a tent like this that is at a place like REI, you can usually get it for a discount. You wait for their sales or things like that, and that can really help reduce the cost of the tent. When I bought the tent in 2022, it was originally the $549. I believe it was on sale for $50 off, and then I waited for them to do their 20% off member sale. In addition to that, I had an REI dividend that I used when I purchased this tent, so it made it even less expensive. I ended up only paying $211 for a $550 tent. That was really one of the big reasons that I took this tent on the Appalachian Trail, is because I already had it and it wasn't in my budget at the time to buy a brand new tent just for this trail. You know, like I said earlier, 65% of thru hikers carry freestanding or semi-freestanding tents, and 65% of people who complete the trail carry these tents the whole way. It's definitely possible to complete your thru hike with a little bit heavier of a tent. The Durston X-Mid Pro 2 right now costs $639. When I bought it, I bought the ground sheet as well, and that is another $43. So those together were $682, and then I had to pay for some shipping to get it to New Hampshire, so it all came out to be about $700. And that is pretty expensive for a tent. Was not a super easy decision to make because I felt really guilty spending that much money on it. Like I've mentioned before, posting videos on YouTube gave me a little bit extra money in my thru hiking budget, and so I was able to afford that. So yeah, the Durston is obviously more expensive, and there's less of a chance that you would be able to get a discount on something. More the cottage brands, they don't do them as often from what I can tell, so it would be more likely that you would be paying full price for this tent. Like I mentioned earlier, Durston does have the they are. It's okay. Like I mentioned earlier, Durston does have the X-Mid 2, not the Pro version, so it's not the Dyneema, so it is less expensive. That version of the tent is $274, and if you get the ground sheet for another $43, it's $317. This is quite affordable for a trekking pole tent. I would say Durston does a really good job of trying to keep their costs low. A lot of their gear is actually relatively affordable, and it's quality gear, which is amazing. So one thing that I will note is that the Durston products are really popular because they're high quality and pretty affordable, so their availability isn't always 100%. I've seen a lot of times that their backpacks and their tents are completely sold out, and you have to wait until they get back in stock to purchase them. So this is something, again, just to take into consideration, or to note that the availability of their products isn't always there, and compared to Sea to Summit, REI, Big Agnes, those are usually found at more retailers, so it's a lot easier to get your hands on one. So I think I've pretty much gone over everything. I'm gonna put up here like a little table of the different categories that I went over and which brand of tent I think did better in each one. So I will put that here. I think Durston probably did better in most of the categories, so you can use this to kind of help make your decision. Now I am going to give you my recommendation. You can take this all with a grain of salt, as I really only have experience with, for the most part, these two backpacking tents. I haven't used any other trekking pole tents. The Durston's the only one I've ever used. I've used other car camping tents and things like that throughout my life, but as far as ultralight backpacking tents, the Sea to Summit is really the only other one I've used. So I'm not versed in every single tent out there, just the ones I have experience with, which is these two. So my recommendation. So if you are going on a thru hike and you do not have a tent already, you don't have any sort of backpacking tent, I would recommend getting a Durston trekking pole tent, mostly because they are lighter. They're lighter, and that is really a huge thing. Like, being able to get your pack weight down, really more important than I even initially thought. It just helps so much with your overall fatigue and your ability to hike day in and day out. I absolutely love the Durston X-Mid Pro 2. It is amazing. I'm 100% bringing it on the next thru hike that I go on. If you don't have it in your budget to get the Pro version, then the regular X-Mid is great as well. I saw a lot of those on the Appalachian Trail. If you do already have a backpacking tent like a Big Agnes, Sea to Summit, VENMO, REI, something like that, and you're considering whether you want to spend some money to get a different lighter tent, I would say that it's not necessary. 65% of the hikers who completed the AT did it with a semi-freestanding or freestanding tent. They did not have a trekking pole tent. So it is 100% possible. What you have is probably going to work for you. You don't necessarily have to spend the money unless you want to, really. So I think those are my 2 cents about that. Let me know if you have any questions. If I forgot to mention something, I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have in the comments. Thank you so much for letting me know that this is content that you wanted to see and you wanted me to make this video. I'm very happy to do it. If you have any other video recommendations, always put those down there. Someone mentioned that they wanted me to do a live stream. Is that something that anyone else is interested in? I'm pretty timid about doing that just because I'm a shy person, but if y'all want to interact with me that way, I will definitely think about it. Like always, thank you all so much for watching and for being here. Mighty fine hiking, everyone. Bye!